In this demonstration, I'll show you how ImpairMaster can easily generate impairment rating reports based on both the 5th and 6th editions of the AMA Guides to the Evaluation of Permanent Impairment. The 5th and 6th editions take different approaches towards documenting and calculating impairment. The 5th edition relies more on objective measurements such as range of motion and strength tests. It also has some diagnosis-based tests for the spinal region. In contrast, the 6th edition is entirely diagnosis-centric and relies on various grade modifiers to adjust an impairment value either up or down. Let's take a look at the 5th edition first. For this example, our fictitious patient fell 30 feet and landed on his upper back. He complained of neck pain radiating down his right arm. 16 months later, after a maximum medical rehabilitation program and an optimal period for physiologic recovery, an examination disclosed a 20% sensory deficit in the C5 area and 50% loss of power of the muscles innervated by C5. The patient also had limited cervical flexion to 30 degrees and right rotation to 50 degrees. X-rays revealed a 20% compression fracture of L2. Let's see how we do this impairment rating using ImpairMaster for the AMA Guides 5th edition. We'll start by creating a new exam and specifying the patient's name and exam date. First, I'll click the New Report button to start a new report. I'll put in the patient's name and optional report reference, and then I'll leave the date of the exam as today's date. When I click the Save button, the report will be initialized and we can go ahead and open it for editing. The impairment editor divides the browser window into two parts. On the left is the impairment navigator, which is used to find the impairment you need to enter, and the right side shows the generated impairment report. I'll now enter the cervical range of motion. In the impairment navigator, I'll click Spinal Impairments, and then Range of Motion. Here on the cervical tab, I'll enter 30 degrees for flexion and 30 degrees for right rotation. When I click the Save button, ImpairMaster generates the report to include these new findings. The report now shows the flexion and right rotation measurements along with their whole person values. The total now is 5% whole person for the cervical region. Let's continue and enter the lumbar compression fracture. In the impairment navigator, I'll click on Spinal Disorders, then Lumbar, then Fractures. Since the compression fracture is on L2, I'll select L2, and I'll enter 20 in the compression fracture field and then click the Save button. The report is now regenerated, and you can see that it has included the compression fracture in the calculation. Finally, let's add the nerve impairments for the sensory and motor deficits associated with C5. In the impairment navigator, I'll click on Nerve Impairments. Then I'll select the C5 nerve root. Now I'll provide the examiner's findings of 20% deficit for sensory and 50% loss of motor strength. I'll click the Save button, and since there's no more nerve impairments, I'll click the Done button. You can see the two new impairments for the C5 nerve root. ImpairMaster determined that the C5 nerve root has a value of 30% for motor impairment and then multiplied it by the grade of 50%, which was determined by the examiner. The result is an impairment of 15% left upper extremity. The sensory value of C5 is shown to be 5%, which is then multiplied by the grade of 20%, giving a 1% left upper extremity. The summary now includes the left upper extremity impairments, which are combined together. You can see the C here, which indicates the numbers are combined instead of being added. 15 combined with 1 equals 16%, which is then converted to a whole person impairment of 10%. Whole person impairments are then combined together. 10 combined with 5 equals 19% whole person. So for this exam, the final impairment is calculated to be 19% whole person. It's worth noting that while in the report editor, I can hover over the various impairments to see the citation of where in the AMA guides the values were taken from. For example, hovering over spinal disorders, the 20% compression fracture, you could see that it pops up a little window that shows table 15-7 on page 404. Also, if I notice that I made a mistake, I can just click on the impairment I need to change. There's no need to go back through the navigation tree to find the impairment. I'll click on flexion, and then you can see how cervical range of motion form pops back up. Let's say I forgot to enter extension. I could put it in now. When I click the Save button, the report is regenerated to include the extension finding. When the report is complete, it can be converted into a PDF by clicking on the small printer icon in the upper right corner of the window. Here you can see each impairment that was entered into the exam along with the citation to the AMA guides in the right margin. At this point, you can download the PDF to your local workstation or you could print it. Now let's take a look at how an impairment rating would be done using the 6th edition of the guides. We'll take an example right out of the AMA guides for an intervertebral disc herniation or AOMSI at a single level. For this case, the patient sustained a blow to the posterior aspect of his neck from a machine support that slipped. Studies revealed a C7-T1 disc herniation. He was managed conservatively and in spite of persistent symptoms refused surgery. He was evaluated for impairment 1 year after his injury. The patient reports neck pain with radiation to the ulnar aspect of the hand and numbness of the ring and little fingers. He is unable to use his dominant left hand for activities for daily living without considerable pain in the neck, left upper back, and ulnar side of the left upper limb with minimal activity. During his exam, he responded to the pain disability questionnaire and scored 120, which is consistent with a severe disability. The physical exam revealed decreased range of motion in the neck, a positive cervical compression with severe radiating pain to the left arm in a C8 distribution, decreased finger flexion strength, and diminished sensation in the ring and little fingers. An MRI revealed a left posterolateral disc herniation of C7 through T1, and an EMG showed left C8 fibrillation potentials. The patient was given a diagnosis of cervical disc herniation with C8 radiculopathy. Let's see how we would do this with ImpairMaster for the AMA Guides 6th edition. We'll start by clicking the green Create New Report button. I'll provide the subject's name, and I'll leave the date of exam as today's date. I'll leave all the other fields with their default values for now, and I'll click Save. We're now in the report editor. For the 6th edition, you could think of the exam as a collection of diagnosis impairments. To start, we'll need to add our first diagnosis, and to do that, I'll click the Add Impairment button at the top of the page. The next step is to select the area affected by the diagnosis. I'll click the spine and pelvis, and then cervical, since this is a cervical disc herniation. ImpairMaster is now giving me a list of diagnoses that are recognized as rateable by the AMA guides. We'll find the one we need under Motion Segment Lesions. Here it is, intervertebral disc herniation and/or AOMSI. With the diagnosis selected, we now need to select the class which best represents the patient's condition. By selecting the various classes, we can see the class's description and see if it best matches the patient's condition. Right now, class 0 is selected, and it shows imaging findings of intervertebral disc herniation without a history of clinically correlating radicular symptoms. If we click through the various classes, you can see that the description will change. In the essence of time, let's jump right to class 2, which is the most appropriate for this patient. Notice first that ImpairMaster is showing you that class 2 for this diagnosis is rated at 11%. The default grade C is the baseline impairment for this diagnosis. Lower grades, such as A and B, may have less than 11% value, and grades D and E may have higher values. Once we chose class 2, the non-key factors tab appeared. In functional history, let's add the PDQ non-key factor. We know the patient scored 120 on the PDQ. This will fall into grade 3 severe disability because it's in the range 101 to 130. I'll select grade 3 and then click Save. Now the non-key factors list shows the PDQ selection. Also notice that the impairment is now 12% instead of 11%. And the grade has moved up to grade D. Now let's apply the sensory and motor deficits. This would be found on the Physical Exam tab. Here I'll select grade 2, since that most closely matches the examiner's description assessment. And I'll click Save. I'll now add the motor strength deficit the same way. Lastly, let's enter the imaging studies, which is also a grade 2. You can see now there are 4 non-key factors selected for this particular diagnosis. As a last consideration, I can enter some text into the narrative portion of the page to provide any additional supporting information. I'll put something here just so you can see where it shows up. And I'll click Save and Finish. With everything complete, ImpairMaster generates the report. You can see that the 6th edition impairment report is nothing like the 5th edition one. This is a more textual description of what was entered, with page and table citations back to the AMA guides. In addition to the textual description of the impairment, ImpairMaster includes a table that details how each grade modifier affected the final grade and impairment value. For this patient, the final impairment is 12% whole person. For demo purposes, I'll add another arbitrary impairment just to show how multiple impairments would look in the 6th edition. Let's add a diagnosis of shoulder sprain to this report. I'll click Add Impairment. I'll pick upper extremities, then shoulder, and then I'll locate the sprain/strain. For this, I'll give it a class 1. And I'll put in a quick dash grade modifier of 3. When I save this and click Finish, you can see now that the report now has the shoulder sprain/strain in it. And at the very end, it shows how it combined, or first it took the 2% right upper extremity for the shoulder strain, converted that to 1% whole person, and then combined the 12% from the disc herniation with the 1% for the shoulder sprain, giving 13% whole person. The final exam can now be converted to a PDF by clicking the print button at the top. For more information on ImpairMaster, please see the comments section for this video or visit www.impairmaster.com. Thanks for watching.